mean, I'd be hesitant to pay really much more over what we paid for him originally, which was around £20 million. Me personally, if I'm doing this deal, anything above 25 would probably give me the heebie-jeebies.
Hello and welcome back to the Villa podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, they say these days Villa podcasts are like London buses. You get none for weeks and then they all arrive at once. That's how we're going, baby. We're going back to back. I think this one's going to come out before the Louise one that we just recorded. But yeah, I mean, again, there's loads to talk about as we alluded to in that podcast that you guys haven't listened to yet, mate. How are you doing, mate? How are you doing? This one is sort of you've got like your half exciting part and your half like really part to both of these deals. Where are you at with this?
Is this more a big podcast of the two?
I think it is. I think it is. Ian Maatsen, let's go.
I think, yeah. Should we start with the headline? Let's start there. Wow. First of all. Wow. Like this is the kind of signing that I think when we all thought about this summer that we hoped Villa would make. This is like, he's been playing at an elite level this season for Borussia Dortmund. Obviously they got to the Champions League final. He, obviously made a mistake in that Champions League final that led to one of the I think it was Vinny's goal, wasn't it? And so, obviously, unfortunate there, but he's so young. He's got so much to learn. He's currently away at the Euros with the Netherlands. And so, he is just, ever since that loan to Burnley has just kind of flashed up on people's radar and has genuinely been on a path to the stars kind of ever since then. He's made this step, honestly, from Championship to Champions League football this season, almost seamlessly. He's such a fantastic kind of proposition. It looks like we're talking about 35 million, which is, I believe, a release for us to get this done. Yeah, I mean, if we can sell, and again, there is obviously the make weight in this deal, as it is with all of the deals that we're currently pursuing this summer, just the first of which that we'll talk about in this episode. Looks like the make weight in this deal could be Jhon Duran. It doesn't seem to hinge on it's not a direct swap deal as it is in the Douglas Luiz deal. It doesn't seem, it's just the kind of way it seems from the paper talk. And that, the reason the Luiz transfer is holding up is because of the issues on Weston McKennie's side, his hesitancy to leave Juventus and the financial compensation he's seeking there. He's stalling that deal. Whereas this deal seems to be happening kind of in separation from the Jhon Duran deal, where again, we're seeing a little bit more of a hold-up. And, we've seen reports that maybe Chelsea have kind of clocked onto his attitude and stuff like that. I mean, how wide those reports are, we don't know. But what we definitely can say is that deal seems to be stalling, whereas Ian Maatsen has just burned the last couple of days. Jumped through so many hurdles, and Matt Law, who's a very, very reliable journalist on the Chelsea end, and I believe is also a Villa fan, says that we hope to have this all done and dusted within the next 48 hours.
It's exciting, mate. It's exciting. If it's coming from Law, it's reliable in regards to Chelsea. He's the go-to Chelsea journo in the know. And Chelsea have reason to want to get this sort of wrapped up pretty quickly because, with this impending PSR FFP June 30th deadline, which we're, at the time of recording, currently 9 days away from. They have to make up, I think it's is it 80 million? Which I think they've done most of it when they sold themselves that hotel. If only we had the same luxury, mate. If only we had the same luxury. What can I say? But what's important to sort of note with these transfers, and this will sort of be reflected in both the Dobbin and Tim deals, when we come to talk about that later in this podcast, is how this sort of looks on the accounts. And, we do have to be careful. There was the sort of the famous Pjanic-Arta swap, which, Juve and Barca both got heavily penalised for. But from my understanding, from from research and whatnot, making it sound like I've been in a massive pile of books. I haven't, but just from browsing the internet, I've actually got to credit Swiss Ramble. This is a thread that's actually 4 years old at this point, which references that swap deal that I just mentioned. So like academy players, or well, we'll talk academy players specifically, right? That money gets put down as pure profit, right? Pure profit is like one of the big buzzwords that's sort of been going around for the longest time when it comes to this. But essentially, why it's important is you can sort of that pure profit can be allocated all in the sort of the term that the deal is done, if that makes sense. So for Chelsea, in this case, we're talking, it's like a £38 million deal that there's reportedly been agreed. He was a Chelsea, youth prospect, obviously spent time elsewhere, but, came through the Chelsea Academy. So all of that £38 million will immediately be booked as profit. Whereas when you're selling or buying another player from another club that doesn't necessarily have that connection, that's when the amortization of the deal comes into play. Again, amortization is another big buzzword that people have been using, and some people don't understand. Essentially, just to boil it down, means that you spread the cost over the length of the contract in relation to the value. So this is obviously really beneficial for Chelsea. I guess it's beneficial for us as well, because whilst this deal doesn't necessarily hinge on us selling Duran, as you sort of mentioned, mate, it's lurching in the background, and we are essentially just sort of handing over money for each of the players, scratching each other's back. It seems like Duran's value has been inflated a little bit as well. I think all the reports were saying like 40 million quid, mate, which, like, Duran has an insane ceiling. But if anybody is paying 40 million quid for Jhon Duran right now, then like you probably need to fire whoever your accountant is, right?
Well, let's be real. There was only one club really that we had hope of getting back as be like that for Jhon Duran, and it is Chelsea. They are, now I don't mean to say this in a bad way towards Jhon Duran, because I completely agree. I think there's a genuine player in there. They're the only club that will go and do something like that, and that will potentially put that amount of money at risk, because that's what it is. It's a huge gamble with Jhon Duran, and he's a player where I personally don't feel like there's a middle ground. He will either go on to have a wonderful career and is capable of playing for some of the world's top clubs, or it will crash and burn. And I think his Villa career has been we've seen the extremities of that, and kind of where we would go from here. If Jhon Duran was to stay at Villa, where his career could go over the next 12 months, I genuinely couldn't tell you. I think it would either continue to be kind of up and down, end next season in a disastrous position, really, where he's still kind of in the position where he is on the peripheries of the squad, getting used as a go and save the last 10 minutes kind of striker, or he would go to the moon. He would continue to score the level of importance in the goals that he's been scoring, the quality of the goals that he's been scoring, and genuinely give Ollie Watkins a rival for that striker position that this club genuinely needs. There's just no in between, and I think with Chelsea, they're the only club that would stump up that kind of cash. I think for anybody else, I think the reasonable thing to pay Villa is probably, I'd be hesitant to pay really much more over what we paid for him originally, which was around £20 million. Me personally, if I'm doing this deal, anything above 25 would probably give me the heebie-jeebies. And so I think for Chelsea to come in and put this kind of cash on the line, if there's a world where we get Ian Maatsen in exchange for a fee that is even around at the same kind of level as what they would pay us for Jhon Duran, I think that is a genuinely masterful deal, and we need to sign that paper as quickly as possible before Chelsea realise what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like I'm probably more paranoid about this deal than the sort of Tim Dobbin deal in terms of like anything getting flagged up. Like, I don't think you can question Maatsen's value, I mean, first of all, his release clause is around 34 million euros. So we're only overpaying by 3 or 4 million euros, pounds, whatever it is. Overpaying, I'm using air quotes for the people on Spotify and Apple. So I think there's like fair value there. And yeah, like as you said, there is a world where Jhon Duran just explodes and he's the Colombian Haaland, and 40 million euros in 2 or 3 years' time, Chelsea fans could be laughing at us for that. So it's going to be an interesting one. But yeah, hopefully we can sort of speed this up because, to talk specifically on Maatsen, this is a really exciting player, and these are the types of players that, the moment we knew Champions League football was ours, we were excited about talking about and doing these podcasts about and seeing represent Villa. Because although Maatsen is extremely young and I don't want to say lacks experience, he's played a Champions League final this season. I don't know. I think a lot of we've kind of come to expect a lot of the players that we're going to sign under Unai, under Monchi, or Monchi specifically, people, you and I, whoever it is, may not necessarily know like a whole bunch about. We're not going to be going out and doing these mad, like Sandro Tonali, for example, Newcastle, that we're not going to be doing those types of deals. So when one pops up and it is somebody who is as exciting as Maatsen, who, is extremely versatile, really quick, would really revolutionise or enhance how we play, then like there's legitimate grounds for us to be as giddy as we are, mate.
Mate, absolutely. This is someone that made Europa's Champions League team of the season. He was fantastic at Borussia Dortmund. Obviously in a loan spell there. He's really quick. He's got a loan. He's got a really lean physique and he can get up and down that wing really, really nicely. I think he'll completely revolutionise what we currently have at fullback. I think it probably spells trouble for someone like Matty Cash, who himself has been linked with a lot of moves away. And so I think when we'll see kind of what Ian Maatsen offers, I think it will really kind of make us realise what we've been missing. I think it will spell the end of the Villa careers of one of Luca Dean or Alex Moreno, but I think it's genuinely for the better. The kind of ceiling that this guy has at just 22 years old is pretty frightening. I don't think it's crazy to say that, one of the hottest or maybe the hottest under 23 prospects at left back right now. I think he really is in those kind of upper echelons. And it's so exciting. It really, really is so exciting. It's probably just as puzzling for Chelsea as the Jhon Duran deal. And I know that they're in a kind of a predicament with their finances as we are, but when you consider the issues that they have, not just at left back, but at full back, the availability of Ben Chilwell, of Reece James, that Marc Cucurella has really not kind of embedded himself in at Chelsea as the fans would have liked. So to kind of let Ian Maatsen go to a Premier League rival suggests that either they maybe don't see what everybody else is seeing, or, their financial situation is more dire than maybe people know. So, yeah, it's one where I think Villa are definitely the beneficiaries of this deal, and I think if we can get Duran to go the other way for a similar fee, it's a Monchi masterclass.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real shortage. There has been for what feels like a decade now of just good, like not just good left backs, like class left backs. And I don't want to tempt fate. I think in 5-6 years' time we could be looking at Ian Maatsen as, the first class in that position. So,
Yes.
This is a really exciting deal. And I think as well, interestingly, this sort of, you alluded to Matty Cash there, mate. This suggests to me that Ezri Konsa's future is, sort of firmly at right back. And, there's been the sort of the talk of both Inter and AC Milan apparently sort of looking at Cash. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think right back is still a position that, clearly needs addressing, but we saw last season you'd have your more reserved left back in Dean when Cash was on the field, and obviously this would change from game to game, but you could kind of see who was going to be more defensive based on who sort of played in that position, and I think this would sort of signify the beginning of the end. I think for cash?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the writing's been on the wall in that position for some time, and I think it's fair to say that the two behind clubs interested. Like, what a way to land on your feet! You know, I think that, and it's a great deal for Villa, and this kind of goes back to what I was just speaking about with Maatsen, and that we don't have to send him to a Premier League rival, because for me, I think there's a real. Let me get this right. I think Matty Cabs is a really, really good footballer, and we've seen that at this level we can be genuinely good. And there's a world where we sold him to a Premier League rival, and he really, really impressed. You know, they gave him the right system, and he went on and had a good season. We'd have to kind of watch that nervously over our shoulder, knowing that he was playing for another team in this league. Whereas to send him abroad, which is obviously the complete opposite of what Chelsea are doing with Ian Maatsen, is a perfect situation. It really is, because, you know, we get to get a player off our books who it's clear that Unai doesn't necessarily see in his long-term plans, but also we don't strengthen one of the teams around us in a very competitive Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely, mate, absolutely. And I think, speaking of players that Unai may not necessarily have in his plans, transitions us nicely to Tim. And this morning I rewatched the tier list video that we did, and we only put one player in the needs alone, and it was Tim. I think maybe we are. I think we're definitely in a minority. I think we're sort of glass half full guys when it comes to Tim. But in the current PSR landscape, £9 million booked pure profit straight away for somebody who, like, if we're being totally honest, when we were having a midfield injury crisis, couldn't get in the team, and then even on the final day of the season, Callum Chambers was looked to be deployed over him. This is arguably probably the most important deal of the summer when you look at it through that sort of lens.
This is crazy, right? This is crazy, and this is probably the biggest example of all the three deals that we've kind of been discussing in this light of just how broken PSR is. There was a report that broke yesterday that the sale of Lewis Dobbin and literally the money that they will get from that deal, that pure profit, could be enough to keep them in the green in terms of this current cycle of PSR regulations, meaning that they don't have to sell someone like Jarrad Branthwaite for a fee that they set. You know, that, like, without this deal, they would have to kind of accept anything even remotely reasonable for Jarrad Branthwaite, whereas something like this could put them in a position where they can hold out for a fee that they want. It's crazy. And you look at the kind of Tim going the other way. We're exchanging two players that are in almost exactly the same situation on both sides. You know, Lewis Dobbin, someone that started, I think, just one Premier League game last season, very much like Tim. He's been someone that's come off the bench a lot. He's an academy prospect that's really sat on the periphery of the squad, has stepped in to cover injuries and stuff like that. This is two players who are going to go to, you imagine, I mean, maybe, I think it's fair to say that Everton's squad is not as good as Villa's. Maybe Tim steps into a more prominent position in the Everton squad than Lewis Dobbin would be at Villa. But I don't think by much. I mean, it depends on what happens with the likes of Nano and the guys that they're currently kind of playing midfield. But again, like, you know, they're not going to sign Tim Iroegbunam and be like, right, 38 games in the Premier League for you next season. He's going to be a player that, you know, is going to be a bit of a project for them. He's still very young. But it's just crazy. I've got an Everton fan in the office where I work that I'm good friends with, and he asked me about Tim, and I was like, he's good. He's got everything physically that you could want for a player in that position. You know, he's big, he's strong, he's very mobile, he gets about well. He's not really got too much going forward, but defensively, you know, there's a world in which he becomes a real stalwart and can do a lot in the sixth position. Had a pretty disastrous loan at QPR, and it kind of felt that's really